Dry, cracked lips gasp for water. Leto II gambit begins here. Spice-starved masses claw barren dunes while the god emperor hoards god stuff, a calculated famine. A chain of desperation binding the honored matres to vengeance. Their rage becomes his weapon, their hunger his design. His design undoing. A calculated famine. He starved the honored matres of spice, not out of cruelty, but calculation. Their survival instincts sharpened into obsession. Without the spice to anchor their prescience, they became vessels of raw vengeance. A leader's grip on resources became a forge for his enemy's purpose. The matres did not beg for mercy, they burned with it. How does a god's hunger for control breed the fire that consumes his throne? Leto's golden path carved a road of ash. The Imperium's bones would crack under the weight of his own design. Spice bled the dunes like sacred ink. The Imperium's pulse synced to its flow. Bene Gesserit liturgies, guild trade routes, Leto II ascetic rule. Power wore the face of scarcity, every grain a covenant, every breath a prayer. The golden path was no salvation. It was a ledger of debts. Leto's famine time did not starve the Imperium, it starved its enemies. The honored matres, exiled to the void's gut, clawed at their cages. Their bodies withered, their rage crystallized. Leto's design was a forge. Spice-deprived women, stripped of their drug-fueled ecstasy, became something colder, not mad, purposeful, a blade honed on centuries of scorn. The Imperium's spice monopoly was not a shield, it was bait. The golden path's sacrifice was a wager. Leto knew the matres would break. Knew they would burn his bloodline to feed their hunger. The dunes whispered warnings, the guild charted the storm, the Bene Gesserit folded their hands. All saw the fault lines, none could stop the quake, for spice is not just power, it is addiction. And when the is yanked away, even gods tremble. The matres' revenge was not born in the scattering, it was birthed in the famine's hollow. Leto's legacy was never survival, it was a match struck in a powder keg of his own making. Leto II visions burned brighter than the suns above Arrakis. He saw the Imperium's road a slow collapse birthed by complacency, by spice addiction. To sever the guild's stranglehold, to fracture the Bene Gesserit's design, he starved the spice wells. Not by accident, not by neglect, by decree. The famine time was a scalpel cutting the umbilical between humanity and Melange. Leto's own body, fused with sandworm DNA, recoiled as the dunes shifted. His veins carried both blood and silica, each breath tasted of grit, each step a dirge for the man he once was. The honored matres, stripped of spice's crutch, clawed their way upward, their rage, once diffuse, sharpened into purpose. Without Melange to blunt pain, they forged resilience. Without the guild's monopolies, they built new ladders of power. Leto watched their evolution like a gardener tending a poison vine. He knew their hatred would outlast his reign. He knew their vengeance would be a storm he could not ride. The Bene Gesserit's grand design unraveled. Their sisterhood, reliant on spice to shape generations, found their Kwisatz Haderach a phantom. The guild's navigators withered, their spice-fueled maps turned to static. Leto's hybrid form, a monument to his sacrifice, became a cipher even he could not fully decode. Did he foresee the honored matres breaching the spiceless void to strike at his line? Perhaps. Perhaps the god emperor merely accepted that every chain of dominion requires a final link to break. The famine time was no salvation. It was a forge, and in its fire the instruments of his undoing took shape. The spacing guild's ships stalled, spice-starved, their navigators blind. The Bene Gesserit's breeding program withered, their genetic designs unraveling thread by thread. Bene Tlalak's smuggled gene seed through the scattering's cracks. They did not create the matres, they refined them. Leto's famine was a scalpel, not a famine. By starving the matres of spice, he forced their evolution flesh in fury, sex, and violence. A weapon without conscience, without memory, only hunger. The guild's collapse fractured trade routes. The matres walked that fracture, reborn in the void between stars. Their bodies, spliced with Tlalak's tricks, became vaults for stolen bloodlines. Leto's own DNA twisted into a key. Did he foresee the cost of his balance, or did the golden path always lead her to a daughter of his pain, raising a blade? The Imperium bled, and the matres, hungry and whole, came home to feed. Leto II hand closed over the spice. The still ships fell silent, the wells ran dry, a billion mouths went unfed. A billion throats burned with dust. The famine time was no collapsate, was a scalpel. Leto carved the Imperium's veins to expose the sinew beneath. The guild's navigators, blind without spice, clawed at their own flesh. The Honored Matres, starved of their poison, turned their hunger inward. What emerged was not a sect, but a storm. Their rage was not born of want, it was forged in the void left by abundance. The Bene Gesserit watched their centuries of design unravel. Their bloodlines, their breeding reduced to kindling for a pyre. The Emperor's gambit did not seek balance. It sought a reckoning. A weapon honed in deprivation would one day split the house he built. The spice had always been a language. Leto merely changed its syntax. Now the matter spoke in vowels of ash and consonants of bone. The Imperium's elite, once sated, now choked on their own greed. Spice was no longer a currency. It was a scar, a promise, a blade. The famine time was a slow, gnawing wound. Spice veins sealed. Stillborn sands choked the stills. Leto II own kin, the Matres, were not starved, they were reforged asterisk. Without the spice to bind their bodies, their flesh became a battlefield. Gene-spliced horrors writhed beneath their skin. Eyes split into secondary lenses. Jaws elongated, teeth sharpened, and in the dark their whispers carried the tang of iron. They did not fight. They unraveled asterisk. A Bene Gesserit acolyte, once a master of voice, would crumble as a matter hummed a frequency that turned her bones to liquid. Leto had not merely deprived them. He had unshackled a predator. The Matres learned to weaponize fear itself. They arrived at the scattering's end not as exiles, but as architects of annihilation. Their first strike was not a city, it was a memory. They infiltrated the imperial archives, splicing data with ghost legions of Leto's children, marching to burn the Zensuni, to drown the Fremen. The Imperium's elite, already hollowed by the famine, turned on itself. Then came the biological war. The Matres carried plagues that targeted the Bene Gesserit's genetic horde. A single touch could unravel centuries of breeding. Sisters screamed as their bodies regressed to primal formshareless, childlike, minds shattered by millennia of knowledge collapsing into madness. Leto's golden path had not failed. It had ripened. The Matres were his vengeance, his blade turned inward. What does a god do when his children outlive their purpose? The Imperium burned, the Bene Gesserit's halls became charnel houses. And in the ash the Matres stood not as victims but as the final screaming question. What is a legacy if not a curse? The famine time was no accident. Leto II starved the Honored Matres of spice, not to destroy them, but to sharpen their hunger into vengeance. He knew their rage would outlast his reign. He knew their pain would become a weapon. Siona Atreides, born of his blood, carried the final key. Her Atreides DNA, twisted by Bene Gesserit design, became the scalpel that slit the God Emperor's throat. Leto's own lineage turned the blade. Did he foresee this, or was even he a pawn in the path he carved? The golden path was never a road to salvation. It was a chasm. Leto's death shattered the Imperium, yes, but at what cost? The Matres, no longer hollow shadows, now surged through the void he left. They burned his temples. They drowned his hymns in screams. The cosmos did not survive, it bled. Leto's plan was a dirge. The Bene Gesserit crumbled. The spice flows choked, and the children of Dune. They became ghosts in a machine that no longer had a pilot. The famine time was the seed. Leto's corpse was the soil. From both, the Matres grew not as avengers of the Bene Gesserit, but as the storm that would drown all Atreides' dreams. A god's legacy is not his triumphs, it is the scars he leaves behind. Leto's final act was not freedom, it was a chain. And the Honored Matres at last had learned how to use it. The chain was not a mistake. Leto II starved the spice to forge a reckoning. By cutting the lifeblood of the Imperium, he turned the Honored Matres from survivors into something sharper, a weapon. Their rage, honed on generations of deprivation, became the blade he could not wield himself. The famine time was no accident. It was a calculus of suffrage, each year of scarcity, a gear in the machine of his design. They would hunger, then hate, then hunt. Not for spice, for blood. The golden path was never about salvation. It was a dirge for the universe's next breath. Leto knew power without limit curdles into rot. His bloodline, his children, his empire all were pawns in a game where the board itself had to burn. The Honored Matres did not break his plan, they completed it. Their war against the House of Atreides was not betrayal. It was the final act of a ritual he had bled into being. What remains, then, of a god who becomes the architect of his own undoing, a path paved in ash? A lesson written in the scars of stars. Leto's name fades, but the chain endures. And somewhere in the silence between dying empires, the cosmos exhales. The Famine Time was a calculated strike, a blade turned inward. Leto II starved the bloodline, not the body. Spice became a chokehold, breeding desperation in the veins of his own. The Honored Matres, husks of the Bene Gesserit's design, clawed through dust and madness. What does a god learn when its children forget the taste of power? They became a storm, not of faith, but fury, a religion forged in deprivation. The Imperium's bones cracked under the weight of their vengeance. Leto's golden path was no savior's road. It was a match struck in a powder keg. The Matres did not rise to serve. They rose to burn, and still the echoes twist, every empire's hunger, every god's miscalculation. The spice runs dry again. Who drinks the last drop? Who bleeds the future dry? The chain does not break, it only bends. The chain bends. Leto's Famine Time starves spice veins, not people. Calculated wound, Matres stripped of elixir, fracture. Their rage becomes a weapon sharper than blades. They hunt Imperium's blood not as pawns but predators. Leto knew their hunger would outlast his body. Knew they'd carve his legacy into bones and dust. The golden path was never his to walk. It was a noose, a cradle, a reckoning. The blade turns, the blade always turns. The golden path is not a road, but a blade that cuts both ways. Leto's whisper lingers, a dirge for the god who became his own undoing spark. The future blades, the future chooses. The spice veins dried, dunes cracked like ancient bones. A bitter wind carried vengeance whispers. Honored Matres, once scholars, now wore scarlet robes, died in blood of the betrayed. Leto's gambit, to starve Imperium's greed, yet hunger breeds monsters. What